today, Professor Dr. Assis Giri and Dr. Richard Smith, all the NELTA and BC's organizing team, wonderful teacher participants from home and abroad. Namaskar and good afternoon all. Once again, I would like to welcome you all in the ongoing webinar series organized by the British Council and NELTA. This is the last webinar session of July, and title of the session is Participatory Action Research for Professional Development, Planning, Designing and Implementation. Without further ado, allow me to introduce today's two dynamic presenters. Professor Dr. Ramasis Giri is an academic staff at Monash University, English Language Centre, Melbourne, Australia. Dr. Giri teaches and researches issues related to ELICOS courses, TESOL, language testing, and language education policy. In his extensive career spreading over Nepal and Australia, he has published in international journals, written book chapters, and published edited books. He is editor-in-chief of NELTA Journal and sub-editor of TSL AZ. Dr. Richard Smith is a reader in ELT and Applied Linguistics at the University of Warwick, UK. He has worked with teachers from many countries, including as academic advisor to teacher research mentoring schemes in Latin America and South Asia. Dr. Smith's most recently published books are Voices in Language Learning and Teaching, a Handbook for Exploratory Action Research, The History of Language Learning and Teaching, 3 volumes, and Mentoring Teachers to Research Their Classrooms. Welcome, Professor Giri and Dr. Smith. Now over to you. All the best.
Thank you very much, Mati, and namaste to everybody. I hope you can hear me okay. Maybe just say yes.
Yes,
okay,
clearly, very clear.
That's great. Okay, very nice to be here with you. I've visited Nepal many times, worked with teachers there. I expect that some of you I know, and some of you are new friends. And I'm very happy to be presenting with Ram. And for NELTA, thank you for this opportunity. Thank you very much, British Council as well. First of all, I'm going to, well, that's our topic, exploratory action research, as you know. I'd like you, as I talk now, just at the beginning, for you to please introduce yourself very briefly in the chat. There is a chat place where you can write your name, maybe where you are, and what kind of students you teach. I imagine that most of you are Nepali, are in Nepal, and some of you may be from other countries, so it'd be interesting to hear where you are from. But first of all, I need to tell you a few things, housekeeping, as they say. There will be a recording made of this webinar, and you'll be sent the link. You'll also get a certificate in your email, and you will also receive an email for your feedback about this presentation. So please do answer. It's very helpful for everybody. Please, if you're not speaking, which you're not today, unfortunately, we're speaking with Ram, please keep yourself on mute and switch off your video. It's better during the presentations. Please do use the chat box, typing in your messages as we talk. We're very happy for you to do that as we talk, with any questions or any comments that you have, and we will sometimes ask you some questions too. Okay, so that's the topic. We're thinking about exploratory action research for professional development. I'm going to be speaking first, and then Ram will come and talk about action research. I'll come back and speak at the end. By the end of this webinar, we hope that you will understand the value of action research, and particularly a particular kind of action research called exploratory action research, and that you'll be familiar with the stages of exploratory action research. And this is what we are going to do with you today. Talk about what is research in general, who can do research, and why. Why should teachers do research? Number 2, what's action research? And 3, how can you do action research? And 4, what is exploratory action research? And 5, we'll end with an example from Nepal, from a Nepali teacher. Okay, so this word research, please write in the chat box what you associate with this word research. Write in the chat box, what's your image of research? It'd be interesting to see what you have to say. Finding, innovate, investigation, some of you have written, create, quite positive things. Please carry on writing what you think, exploring in detail, searching something, searching, analyze, find a gap, find something new, new findings, explore. I'm just reading what some of you are writing now. Reflection, yeah, exploration, finding something new. These are all, I agree, things that we can associate with research. Let me share with you, first of all, that sometimes, well, actually, quite often, teachers don't necessarily have positive views of research, and quite often teachers will think of research as actually something not very familiar to themselves, even as something a bit scary or strange, unfamiliar. And these are the sorts of image that we may associate with research, kind of natural science, sort of laboratory kind of research. But today we want to share with you that teachers can do research. It can be something very familiar and something very useful for teachers, not scary, not strange. Here are two more images that quite a lot of teachers may have about research. That is, you are already very busy people. You have many classes, you have many students, maybe large classes. You have lots to occupy your minds already. And some of you may be thinking, well, why should I think about research? I'm already busy enough. So we want to help you to see that maybe research doesn't have to be a big burden. In fact, it can be very useful for you in a very practical way. So that's what we hope to show you today. You may, from university, perhaps have a memory of research, being reading lots and lots of books or lots of articles. It doesn't have to involve reading a lot. The reason for doing research as a teacher, it usually comes from your classroom. It doesn't come from books or from articles. That's something that may be quite different from the kind of research that you know from university. Also, you don't have to write a report at the end. Teachers we've worked with in Nepal and other countries have often shared what they've found with other teachers by talking, by using posters, for example. And we'll show you some examples later how teachers can share research with other teachers by posters, not always by writing. Although I'm sure that Ram, my colleague, will be happy if you do want to write about your research for NELTA journals or NELTA newsletters. And that's something, yeah, we would like to encourage, but you don't always have to worry about that too much from the beginning. So I hope to show you that research can be close to you. It can be useful to you. And to start with, let's have some rather simple definitions of what is research. I like this very short definition. Many of you also wrote investigating to get knowledge, to get understanding. And it's contributing, thank you, Laxman, contributing to knowledge you've written. I would say contributing to your own knowledge, especially to your own understanding as a teacher. And another definition that I like, that research involves maybe three steps. To make a question, what's the question in your mind? Getting information, or we use the word data, to answer your question, because data means information to answer a particular research question, and then interpreting this information to answer the question in your mind. So if we think about research like that, maybe it starts to seem relatively down to earth, something that actually we do in our everyday lives. Maybe some of you might start to think, actually, I'm already doing some kind of research with my students, with my pupils in my classrooms. I think every time we try to, we understand we have a problem or some issue or something we're worried about as a teacher, we may try to go and find answers to questions in our head. Sometimes by reading, sometimes by asking other teachers, sometimes by asking students for their opinions. Maybe if you ask students to write you a little note about what they think about the class, for example, I think you are doing some research already. Or let's imagine that you want to travel somewhere. There are different ways of traveling. Maybe take a bus, maybe, perhaps, I don't know, take a train, perhaps take an aeroplane even. You have some question in your mind, which way shall I travel? And you have certain ways of finding out by comparing the prices or comparing the amount of time that it takes, for example. So you go and get the data, and then you make your decision. You interpret the information to answer your question. So research can be part of our everyday lives, and it can be part of teachers' lives. So we have teachers, we have researchers, and maybe you think of researchers as something different from yourself, as a different job from being a teacher. And that's, of course, true. Some people devote all of their time to doing research. Um, but you know, um, it doesn't have to be so separate. It may be difficult to know which of these people is the researcher, which is the teacher. Okay, the guy on the right has got a magnifying glass. Maybe we'd say, well, he's a researcher, but the people may be the same, and the person on the left may be doing teaching and maybe researching about their teaching, or we don't know exactly who is the teacher, who is the researcher from these pictures. And that's what I want to share with you, that actually teachers can be researchers, teachers as researchers. And that's what we want to share with you. How can that be? How can it be that teachers are researchers, or how can teachers be researchers? That's what we want to talk to you about today. So I'm going to talk about teacher research. Teacher research. What is teacher research? Well, it's not research about teachers, okay? It's research done by teachers. That's why there is a hyphen. Research initiated and carried out by teachers into issues of importance to them in their own work. And here's another definition, different definition: addressing questions that arise from your practice as a teacher by gathering data, analyzing it, and sharing what you find. So you can see there, that's just like that definition of research that I gave you before. Teachers can do that kind of research. In very simple definition, research by teachers for teachers. Somebody has shared their screen. I've got to go and find my slides again. Just 1 second. I hope it's this one. Let's just check.
Radhaji, could you please check that? Somebody has shared their screen.
It's not that one. Sorry about that. That was a experiment for
I think
PowerPoint.
someone requested control.
Yes.
Okay, let me just try to find it again. It's a bit difficult. I need to go to my computer. Just 1 second, sorry. I've got it now, I think. Yes, here it goes. We have to wait a little bit for the PowerPoint to upload. Sorry about that. But I hope it's this one. So we're talking about, anyway, I wonder what you think about that so far. You might like to write in the chat. Do you think that teachers can be researchers? Have any of you done any teacher research? You might like to share that in the chat if you like. But anyway, we've got back to our slides now. Let me just see if I can control that. Let's see. Unfortunately, it's not moving forward. This is maybe I'll try press on this. Yes, this is better. Okay. I'm sure you all have the same kind of problems with new technology. If you have a possibility of teaching these days with the internet, and so I'm sure you're very forgiving of this. Oh, let me go back. So there we are. So that's research. What is teacher research? Now, okay. But why could it be useful? What's the point of teachers doing research? That's what I want to talk about now. Here is one teacher, Miriam. She's from Pakistan, actually. And about 7 years ago, I did a workshop in Kathmandu. It was the first time I came to Nepal, and it was a British Council workshop, a Hornby school, for teachers from Nepal, but also Bangladesh, Pakistan, and India. And the theme of the conference was teaching, not the conference, it was a workshop for about 30 or 40 teachers. And I did that with Amal Padwad from India, who some of you may know from INET. And the theme was how to teach in low resource classrooms, how to teach when you teach in a very large class, maybe without technology, etc. So this is the kind of teacher I've been working with over the last 7 years. And Miriam herself had many problems, as many of you do, I'm sure. And I wonder if some of you may have the same problems as Miriam. But I want to show that teacher research, can be helpful for addressing some of the problems that you might face. So let's see. So Miriam said, I have too much homework to mark. It's impossible to give effective feedback to everyone. Do you have the same problem if you're teaching in a large class, if you're teaching with many students, and you have homework? How do you give feedback to so many students? Well, we encouraged Miriam, we encouraged the other teachers to turn their problems into questions. So this is the first step, the first thing that we'd like to advise you to do. We know that you have many problems in your teaching. We know that you have, and especially these days, we know that how many different problems you are facing trying to reach your students in this situation of COVID-19. You could try to write down all of the different problems that you are facing, all of the different things that you are worrying about. You could do that in the chat if you like, or you could do that at home. But what we would like to encourage you to do is write down all of those problems and then try to turn them into questions. So we encouraged Miriam to turn that problem into a question. How can I provide feedback to students? What different forms of feedback can I use? By turning it into a question, that's the beginning of a kind of research that can take her forward into more positively into trying to find answers to that question. Here's another example. Not all students participate due to being in a large class. We encouraged her to turn that into this question. How can I design activities or group work so all students participate? And here's another example. And another example. Okay, so that's the first step. Take the problems, try to turn them into a question. And remember, a question is the starting point for research. Now, in that workshop, you may know Sagan on the right. He's very active in NELTA. He's in Ireland at the moment. Sagan was one of the teachers in the workshop. But for all of the teachers, we encourage them to then go and try to choose one or two of their questions and go and try to find answers from other teachers in the room who have experience in the same kind of situation as them. And that's what they did. They went and actually tried to find answers. So this is a kind of research. It's not action research, but it's a kind of research. Is with your question, go and try to find answers by asking other teachers or by reading on the internet, for example, to try to find answers. So that's what we did. We asked the teachers to put their questions onto the wall, and we asked them to write their name on this post-it note if they felt they had some possible answer to the question. And then we asked them to go and interview each other like that. So that's a kind of research, a very down-to-earth kind of research. And eventually they then presented to each other. They gave presentations with posters about what they had discovered. So that was a simple kind of research. But the point I want to make is that's research that is relevant to teachers' own needs, and it's very useful kind of research. And sometimes questions like this, these were teachers from Assam, I remember, who sometimes have to handle two classes at one time because the other teacher is sick in a large room. How can they do that? this kind of question, you can't really find many articles written about this kind of thing. But these are important questions for teachers where they actually have to go and do their own research to try to find answers, because there's not much research by university teachers about that kind of thing. Well, if you're interested, you can find more of those stories in this book, which we edited from that workshop. And if you look at the link in the bottom, I'm just going to type it into the chat box as well, because if you click on that link, it's the same link. You'll find that there are quite a lot of interesting resources for you connected with this presentation. I'll give you that link again later. Now, I've worked with teachers in Chile, in Latin America, and I've worked with teachers in India and in Nepal. And just here are some of the questions, just a couple of examples of things that teachers have got together to try to research. In Chile, 7 years ago, one group was interested in how can we involve parents into the English learning process of their children. They got together, decided this was a good question for them to look into together, and they actually went and interviewed teachers later to try to find answers to this question, and they shared what they had found. It was very practical for them, and very useful, and especially important now, isn't it, with the current lockdown situation, how to get parents involved in supporting their children. This was an example from India, and this was actually the poster that the teacher made at the end of their research. Why do students cheat in exams? And they went and did interviews, discussions with students, questionnaire, and they found some useful answers to this question, which was bothering them. So we started to see a few examples. So we know that this is teacher research. We know that already. I've shared with you why it might be useful, and now Ram is going to share with you something about action research, which is a particular kind of teacher research. Over to you, Ram.
All right. Yeah, I hope everybody can hear me. Thank you, Richard. Everyone can hear me, right? Yeah, someone say yes. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, thank you very much. Before I start, I would like to clarify one thing, and that is that we have tried to keep the session simple. For example, keeping the range of participation in mind, I have selected some simple ideas, some simple experiences, and one or two simple stories on exploratory action research to share. And that's what I'm going to do now, share stories, share my experiences. As Richard pointed out, our aim is to inspire you develop your own action research project and share your own stories, and to join the conversation of other ELT practitioners. So before I proceed, I would like you to join the conversation of this webinar, or continue, the conversation of this webinar. So please answer this question using chat as your space. Please write down a few words to say what action research is for you.
Can you see it, Ram, or shall I read the chat for you?
Yeah, I can see it. Yes,
okay,
yeah.
That's great.
So as I speak, please, continue writing. And yes, I can see some great responses. Action research is for the improvement of current issues in classroom. That's great. To explore and find something new. Well, that's great. It happens in classroom. Yeah, true. Research is the search for knowledge by finding gap. Great. Okay. Next, please. In one of the other sessions, the previous session, someone said something like this, and I think this summarizes what you have been saying in the chat. Action research is a systematic and principled way of looking into and reflecting on a problem, or on a language teaching problem. Now, there are two keywords here, systematic and principled. And that we need to understand that. It is systematic and principled because it follows certain ethical and methodological understanding, certain procedures, certain timetable, and so on. For example, if you do develop a project, it has to follow a timetable, it has to follow certain standard procedures, and that makes it systematic. Yeah, next, please. Okay, so I'm looking at your responses, and I think some of the questions, some of the points I have here summarize what you have said in the chat. So action research looks at your own actions as a teacher, and your actions are what you do. So what you do, your teaching and assessment practices, for example, your activities that you organize to make learning happen, and the support activity that you provide for learning. How you do it, the methods, the techniques, the activities that you conduct, and any educational bit that you organize in order to make learning happen. What you use, your lesson plans, for example, particular texts, how is that text effective? Is the text useful? Is the text that you are using interesting for your group of learners? We have prescribed textbooks in Nepal. So are the materials contained or given in the textbook useful, relevant, adequate for your learners? Support materials that you use, tools. Now these days we have been using various tools like smartphones and iPads and things like that. So how effective are they? Are they really helping, or they are creating some kind of problem? So these are some of the questions you can ask, and as Richard said, you start with asking questions. Also, your experiences, for example, whether or not the students are learning, whether or not you are achieving your teaching or professional goals, whether or not certain activities are effective, and so on. So, yeah, next slide, please. So, I'm just trying to create an understanding of action research before I actually take you to the different steps of action research. So action research then may be defined as looking into the plans and practices, methods and techniques that you apply, activities you conduct, and the support materials that you use to make learning happen, of course, with a view to improving them, to changing them if that is required. Next, please. Okay, so how do I do action research? Here, the narrative, the story that, we will, Richard, the previous one, thank you. Richard just started with a great story, great narrative, and I think, as a teacher, we should start there asking questions about our own practices. So here I'm going to present a story of a colleague, and through the story I'm taking you to the different steps of action research. So Tim, a teacher of academic writing at a reputed international institution here in Australia, had students mainly from Asia. As a part of his support scheme to student learning, in a 4-term course, he conducts what we call here one-to-one student consultation every week. Of course, the aim of the consultation is to track students' progress and check whether they are having any difficulties or experiencing any problems and so on. A student consultation in Australia is an interactive and, at least in theory, a student-led process. It is an occasion in which students engage with their tutors to get their queries addressed and learning plans approved. Now, I've selected this story because I know that in many higher educational institutions in Nepal, this has just started to happen. A student consultation, one-to-one consultation with the students. Okay, next slide, please. So Tim observes that his students are generally quiet at consultations, and he ends up doing most of the talking. He himself does most of the talking. In other words, student consultations are short and largely teacher-led sessions in which students share none of their concerns. At the end of the term, he finds that the students continue to have the same weaknesses and the results are, disappointing. Frustrated Tim starts to search for answers. I cannot be the only one who has this problem, he thinks. A careful search of literature provides him with some of the answers. After a discussion with some of his colleagues and his supervisor about his plan, he develops an intervention tool which he calls Student Consultation Checklist. In term 2, he makes it compulsory for every student to bring the completed checklist to consultations to share. He notices now that the consultations are much more interactive, that the students engage more in the process, and that they feel more comfortable in talking to the teachers about their experiences and so on. In other words, the students have a sense of ownership of the consultation process. Tim keeps records of his consultation in 4 ways. First, he prepares digital notes of every consultation. Second, the students, with students' permission, he records some of the sessions. And third, he invites his supervisor to sit in some consultations. And finally, he collects a student's response on the use of consultations checklist. An analysis of the data reveals that his consultations are now more productive and stimulating. In term 2, the results of his students show some promising improvement in the student's performance. So he continues with the new consultation process in the next term. So to put all the things that Tim has done in a diagrammatic form, these are the steps. Next slide, please. Okay, so starting with 1, he identifies a problem in his practice. Then he plans an intervention. Then he applies the intervention and then collects reactions data, if you like, in different ways. He analyzes data and observes, and then he reflects. And because he finds some improvement, he decides to continue the same. So next slide, please. Okay, so here, if I have to summarize the process, I will say this. So review your current practices and identify a researchable issue. And it could be anything, from a simple practice, simple activity that you organize in your classroom. Imagine a plan, imagine a way forward. How will you inquire or know more about it? Try it out, explore, and seek a solution. test to see if the solution works. Review a new or current practice and continue doing it. Next slide, please. So when you are exploring, start exploring with your own perceptions. You can start exploring your perceptions by looking at your own written reflections, your notes, for example, other people's written ideas on the topic, notes from informal conversations with colleagues. Remember, Tim had conversations with his colleagues and supervisor about it to see what they think about it, if they have similar issues. And at the end of the day, he makes his notes. Next slide, please. I'm running out of time a bit, so I'm rushing, so sorry about that. Explore other perceptions, and I will let you read it, and I will move on to the next slide, please. Exploring behavior, your lesson plans, for example, materials, lesson recordings. Yes, actually, this is very useful because sometimes even audio recording of your own lesson helps know quite a lot about your own practices. So lesson recordings, critical friends notes, pictures of your class, how students are engaged, or how students work and so on. Students work, student performance, students written feedback and so on. Next slide, please. So this will be my last slide. Sorry, sorry, Richard, I'm taking a bit of time. So yeah, I mean, these are some of the principles of action research. This action research is cyclical, it's a participative, it's a qualitative, it's a, it's a reflective. And I think these terms are self-explanatory. I don't have to explain. If there are questions about it, I will explain in the question answer session. So over to you, Richard, again.
Okay, thank you, Ram. So Ram has been explaining action research, which is one kind of research that teachers can do and have done in their classrooms to find answers to the questions, practical questions, which are in their minds. And this is what's important about what we're talking about today. We are not talking about academic research. We're talking about research which is practical and possible by ordinary teachers even. But it may look to you a little bit scary to engage in the kind of research that we've been talking about. And I have been working a lot with teachers who are very busy and working in very large classes and very, what we might call, difficult circumstances. So I've been very concerned to develop ways of doing research which teachers might find possible for them. And what we developed, especially beginning in Latin America, in Chile, is a kind of action research which we call exploratory action research. And basically, before I show you in practice what that might mean, it's very, very similar to what Ram has been explaining to you. But before we decide on some action, we spend quite a long time just exploring the situation, reflecting on the situation, actually getting data about the current situation that we are facing, so that when we come to deciding on a new action, it fits very well with the context. It fits very well with the actual problem that we have been uncovering. And we've done this with Nepali teachers in a scheme called the ARMS scheme, British Council scheme. Some of you are mentors there. I can see your names, so hello to all of you. And some of you are teachers who've gone through this. So please do share your experiences of exploratory action research and maybe share how useful it was or wasn't for you in everyday classrooms. So exploratory action research begins with exploration and then we go into action. That's what's special about it. Let me show you that that's action research. This is exactly what Ramji was sharing with us. You plan a change, you act to make something better, you observe what happens, you reflect, and then maybe plan again. But before we act with exploratory action research, we first of all explore before we act. So if I go to my next slide, you can see that there is a whole stage of exploration before we come to the action research on the right. So basically, we will plan to explore something, explore the problem. I'll give you an example soon. And then you explore it, and then you analyze and reflect, and that's when you start to decide what are you going to do to try to solve the problem. And that's when you begin with your action research. Now, just before I share an example, let me share with you something from a teacher in Chile called Daniel. And he did that exploration. His problem was he thought that his students didn't like him speaking in English in the class. He tried to use English as much as he could in the class. I expect many of you do the same. But he could see, or he thought he could see, that the students didn't really want it. They didn't really like it. That's what he thought. So that was his problem. Okay, how can I solve this problem that students don't like my use of English in the class? That was his question that he began with. But we encouraged him to explore it first before he decided, for example, to try to reduce the amount of English or some action like that. So he explored it by doing a very simple questionnaire. Questionnaires don't have to be very complicated. It could just be a simple question. What do you think of me speaking English in the class? In the student's mother tongue, you could just write it on the board, ask them to write their answers on a piece of paper. You get the piece of paper. It could be just as simple as that. And he got their answers, and he analyzed their answers, and he found, oh, actually, most of them said they wanted the class to be in English. So that completely changed his point of view, just exploring. That meant that he didn't reduce the amount of English. He just tried to find ways to improve the situation in other ways. So that was his exploration, and it shows you why exploration can be a very good first step. Okay, I'm not going to speak more about exploratory action research in the abstract. I'm going to give you an example, and we're going to end today with this example. And this is Shova Shahi, who is a Nepali teacher. This comes from a book edited by Janak Negi of stories of teachers, exploratory action research. I'll give you the link. You can find, I'm going to put the link again in the chat box. If you go to that link that I put there, you can find the link to Janak Negi's book, where you can find this and other stories. So Shova was a teacher in quite a large class, teaches in this place, in Sukhet. And she teaches classes 6, 7, and 8. And this is one of her classes, and maybe familiar kind of setting for you. This was her problem. She had an overcrowded classroom, 89 students. It's very difficult to manage. She felt that students used to make disturbance, and she tried many different things as a teacher. She tried to change the seats of the students. She tried to give authority to the class monitor. She tried to divide students into different groups, but she couldn't get success. And this was all before she started doing exploratory action research. So that was her problem. So we encouraged her to change her problem into not just how can I improve the situation, but some questions which help her to explore the situation. This was exploratory research, first of all. So what particular difficulties do I have in the class, and what causes the disturbance in the classroom? The methods, some of those that Ram showed you, she got a colleague to observe her. She was lucky to have somebody who could observe her, but she also took notes herself after each class, observing carefully what was happening in the class. That was her research methods, down-to-earth research methods. What did she find? This is still exploratory part. She found that most of the students were paying attention. She found that those who were sitting near the windows were sometimes looking outside, and they were talking to others about what they saw, and that caused a disturbance. And some other students were talking about those students who were looking outside the classroom. This is what she found from her own notes, but also from her colleague observing. So that was the end of her exploration, but it meant that she could think of an appropriate action to try to solve this. So she moves into action research. We've had the exploratory part, now we move into action research, just like Ramji was explaining. Plan of action, give more responsibilities to the students sitting by the windows and the side talkers, the people next to them and the people, And she would also, I'm sure some of you do this already, she would move close to the students who were talking unnecessarily with their friends. That was her plan. This is what she actually did, and you will see how she did some research to see whether it worked or not. So this is the start of her action research. Give tasks to those by the windows. These were the tasks that she gave them. They would take notes. They would summarize the lesson to her. She would ask them to write the answers by discussing with their friends, sometimes giving them group leader roles. And she would move closer to them and make eye contact. So a very practical kind of research, and this is what action research is like. That's her doing what she said she would do. And what did she find? So can we switch? Yeah, thanks. So she planned the action, she did the action, she observed, remember, and then she's going to reflect. She found that, and she repeated what she had done. She took some notes herself, and she asked her friend, her colleague, to come and watch and see if there was any change. Now, students do not talk unnecessarily. They concentrate more. They do sometimes talk. That's because they are human. They don't talk unnecessarily. And they have started talking about the subject matter, which is a positive sign of learning. So this is a real example from a classroom where exploratory action research made a big difference for Shova. You can find more stories like that in these books. More examples. These are books of stories of teachers who, in Chile, in Peru, and in Mexico. And you can find these from the link that I shared. I'll do it again, just to advertise these books, which I hope that you'll find interesting. We try to make them reader-friendly for teachers. And I'd recommend that all of you, if you are interested, this is the main book where we share ideas, hopefully still in a reader-friendly way for teachers, called the Handbook for Exploratory Action Research, all of these are freely available online, British Council publications that have come out of the projects in Chile, in Peru, and in Nepal and India recently. So we'd like to say thank you very much to all of you for paying attention, and we'd like to ask if you have any questions about what I've been saying or what Ramji has been sharing with you today. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Saritaji, could you please pick up the questions? Radhaji? Now the floor is open for questions, please.
There are a lot of questions, actually, Motiji. Radhaji? Hello?
Yes,
okay, I'll start with the first question from Sudha Krishnanand. Is student assessment a kind of research? Our question is student assessment a kind of research?
Good question. Ramji, do you want to answer, or shall I?
Okay.
Any of you, please.
Yeah. I think, okay, I will start, and Richard, please join in. Is a student assessment a kind of research? Look, assessment, it depends on with what purpose you are doing the assessment. Assessment can be research. If you, for example, if you are doing it to see how much your students have learned or achieved, then probably it's not research. But if you are focusing on, what part of your lesson or what part of your practice has worked or not worked, then it could be an action research. Richard.
Yeah, I think it's a nice question because
Yeah.
I was at the beginning I was trying to show that research is much wider than takes in much more than we normally think of. So we often think of research as a very narrow field of action, which is just done by university academics into things which maybe don't have much to do with us as everyday ordinary people or as teachers. But I was trying to show that actually research, it's wider. If we think of research in a very simple way as having a question and getting data and answering a question, I might say, yeah, it is a kind of research. You have a question, which is what is the performance of my students? How are my students doing? And especially as a teacher, if you're interested in that, in order to improve your teaching, you might ask that question, do some testing, get the data, and then improve your teaching on that basis. So you could say it's a kind of exploratory research. But of course, it's used for many other purposes, not just to answer my personal questions as a teacher. It's used in order to classify students, in order to judge them, etc., etc. So yeah, it could have a research purpose, but as Ramji said, it depends on your purpose, really. Next question.
Okay, the second question is two people have asked the same question. That is Tanka Bhattarai and Ganarian. Is action research and exploratory action research different?
Yes, because I've been trying to show that action research starts maybe with planning and action. Well, that's how action research is usually presented. You start by reflecting on your problems, your issues, and then you think of some action to immediately try to solve the problem. We are emphasizing starting not with planning and action. Start by exploring the situation. Have that phase of exploring where you're actually planning to explore, not planning to act. Plan to explore it. Explore it first, like Chauvin. Explore what the problem is. Explore what the nature of the problem, without trying to change anything yet. When you've understood the problem, the situation better, then go into the action research.
Okay, there is another question from Ganesh Ji. He says, how to run exploratory classes where all students are Bhojpuri as mother tongue, as teacher rarely gets their language because his mother tongue is Nepali, and students are very poor even in English language.
So what's the problem, Radha? Is that Radha?
How to run exploratory classes where all students are their mother tongue is Bhojpuri, and the teacher gets their language because his mother tongue is Nepali, and students are very poor even in English language. So all the languages are, not matching with. So how to do exploratory research? Thank you.
Well, look. Sorry, I'm just going to answer. That's not a problem. That's not a problem just for doing research. That's a problem for your teaching, isn't it? You have to find you have to find a way to communicate with your students as a teacher, and that's not an issue for us to answer. Sorry, but that's an issue of communication generally, isn't it? I think.
Richard, can I join in?
Yeah.
I think look, as an advocate, I should say, as a student of multilingual education, I think that can be an advantage because we can start with what the students already know. So they know Bhojpuri. So with that, we will take them to English and then to Nepali. So there can be a 3-language education activities, if you like, in the classroom. And that can create very rich learning experience both for the teacher and the students. But then again, sorry, go ahead.
No, sorry. Go ahead. Sorry.
I was going to say that, of course, it it will then depend on how you organize the activities, how you design the classroom practices, and so on. Remember, there are 3 languages involved, and the students who are the recipients of the learning knows only Bhojpuri. So we start with that, take them to English and then to Nepali in, in a 3-way approach.
Yeah, thank you. And yeah, it sounds like it's an important issue for you, of within your teaching, of how to communicate with your students. So that could that not be your question? In other words, how can I communicate with my students who speak a different language from me, or maybe who don't understand Nepali or English? That could be a good question. How can I question? And you could explore different ways that different suggestions, maybe that people have suggested. Other teachers may suggest things. That could be a good starting point, in other words, for your research, because we know that actually the student's own language can be a good resource for learning and for teaching. But as a teacher, you need to try to find ways to use that resource in your teaching. So I'd suggest that could be a good starting point for exploratory action research in your context. In other words, I don't have the answer. Research will help you to find the answer.
Okay, there is another question by Dr. Shanti Rekha. How to understand when to carry action research and other types of research?
Ramji, do you want to answer, or shall I?
Please go ahead. But what is the question again? Sorry,
how to understand when to carry action research and research?
Okay, Richard.
Well, as we've been, you are a doctor. I suppose you may have a doctorate, a PhD, perhaps, rather than being a medical doctor. So you are familiar. You are quite familiar with many different kinds of research. But we are talking today, especially to teachers who may not be very familiar with many different sorts of research. We are emphasizing that action research or exploratory action research, in particular, can be a very practical way of solving problems. I think that's what we are emphasizing today. So if your concern is quite a practical concern related to your own teaching, because we are talking about practitioner research, we're talking about research which is done by teachers, in this case, for their own purposes, for their own good, and for the good of their students. That's the main purpose. If that is the main purpose, then exploratory action research would be, or action research would be a good thing to do. If you are more concerned to, I don't know, to add knowledge to general knowledge within the field of applied linguistics or ELT, still, it can be useful, but it needs to begin, in my view, it needs to begin with something which is not in what you have been reading about, but which is in your own real situation. And then you would adopt exploratory action research or action research. Otherwise, if you're more interested in generalizing, then you would do some other kind of research with interviewing many teachers, or doing questionnaire with many teachers, more like an academic kind of research. So that's my view.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, if the aim is to produce new knowledge to contribute to the existing body of knowledge, then probably it's the research. But if your purpose is to improve the practices that you do in order to deliver a course or a program, then probably action research is more appropriate.
Yeah, action research, exploratory action research, in my view, is primarily, so in the first place, the most important thing is that it is going to be helpful to you as a teacher. Secondly, in the second place, it can be helpful for others. It can be helpful for other teachers if you share it with other teachers. And it might even be useful for many teachers around the world if you write about it, for example. But that's a secondary, or that's a third place dimension.
Okay. There's one question, can I take from here? Lakshman Shrestha said, generally exploratory action research is not a serious type of research. Dr. Smith, what do you think?
Well, it depends what you mean by serious. Serious in the eyes of who, or in the eyes of whom? Are we worried about what academics think? Maybe you are worried about your PhD supervisor, or you are worried about gaining acceptance within the university academic framework. I think it can be serious, actually. I've got students, I'm supervising a PhD student now who has carried out an exploratory action research study. These days in UK universities, it is quite acceptable for PhD students to do action research, exploratory practice, exploratory action research, but they have to make it, they have to show how it is going to contribute, as Ramji said, to the wider knowledge. Okay, that's the difference. But so it can be serious. I don't agree that it's not a serious kind of research in an academic way. It depends on what, well, but in many contexts, perhaps it's not yet recognized as a serious kind of research. But we know that a lot of so-called serious research is actually very, very useless for teachers, and it's called applied linguistics, but it's actually quite irrelevant to the concerns of most teachers around the world. So I'm talking within NELTA here, invited by NELTA. This is an association for teachers. It's not an academic scholarly association. So I think I can say this quite freely. As I get older, I don't mind saying these things and being rude about university academics, because frankly speaking, they have their own rules of behavior. So it depends where you want to fit in. But what I would say to teachers is this is it can be a very important and serious kind of research. It can really help teachers, and it has been shown to help teachers with practical problems much more than so-called serious research, which has been often very useless, even if it has been read by teachers, which is usually not the case. So I'm being a bit rude, but I think the question was a little bit provocative.
Saritaji, we'll take only one question, then we'll wrap up. Could you please?
Yeah, thank you, Motiji. Yes, thank you, Motiji. I was looking at the question by Baburam Timulsena. He says, Dr. Giri, in an action research of this kind, you mention and suggest for English teaching into classroom practices. It's fine. My question is to you, seem to be highlighting about that. Would you please share your impression as to how a teacher would analyze the data in this process? I think this will be the last question. Thank you, Dr. Giri.
Okay, I missed some part of it because you broke away. So could you please repeat the question once again, quickly?
Dr. Giri, in an action research of this kind, you mention and suggest for English teaching into classroom practices. It's fine. My question is, you seem to be highlighting about data analysis. Would you please share your impression as to how a teacher would analyze the data in this process?
Right. Okay. That's a very, very good question, actually. And remember in my story, I said that he collected information in 3 or 4 different ways. And I think one way to approach the different sources of information would be to see what they all say about this particular issue. So take one theme, for example, about the whole thing and see how different sources of information say about it. That will be one way of analyzing it. Right. Say, for example, if you observe, you conduct class observations, if you talk to a colleague, if you have your own records, if you have done any audio video recordings, take a particular theme, particular segment, and see what you've got, what all the 4 different sources say about that particular segment or particular issue. So, I mean, it's a qualitative analysis. We are interested in what we observe and what can be done, what they suggest can be done to improve it. So we probably will not focus much on the quantitative analysis or numerical value of the issues, but the qualitative aspect of it. How, for example, certain sources of data say it can be improved or changed or modified and so on. Richard?
Thank you. Yes, I'll just add a comment in the chat box, just as a place that people can go, and say thank you very much for all of your questions. I just want to answer very quickly one question. It said, can we teach successfully without doing action research? And absolutely want to say, of course you can. And there are so many teachers who you don't need to do action research to be successful. But it's an enhancement. It can improve things for you. That's all I would say. And can I just say one more thing, which is via the link that I've shared. There are links to Facebook, a Facebook group which brings together teachers around the world who are doing teacher research. So you may like to join that Facebook group and keep in touch. And I'm sure that NELTA and Dr. Giri would like you to stay in touch with NELTA to report on your teacher research and report on your successful experiences, even if they're not action research.
Can I have 30 seconds to make a suggestion here to the British Council and NELTA?
Sure.
Yeah, okay. Look, I think NELTA is already making some space to promote action research. For example, if you look at the Journal of NELTA, you see that we have a separate section for action research reports. So what else can British Council and NELTA do? I think what they can do is create a network, for example, in NELTA as an association, there can be action research, a special interest group, and probably they can hold meetings and conferences of their own to talk about keep these conversation going. NELTA can also have a separate publications for stories like Janak Negi, for example, has compiled. So this will promote the action research in Nepal, and I see that there is tremendous interest in this field, and having that space with support of the British Council at NELTA will help it, take it further. Thank you.
Thank you. Now it's a time for vote of thanks. So actually, Dr. Richard and Dr. Smith, that was very good suggestions. NELTA has also researched Shell, and will consider it in future to work on together with BC and NELTA for this action kind of exploratory research. But there are many questions, and the time, and I could not entertain all the questions. Due to time constraint, we could not put forward. However, you could write to Dr. Ramassis Giri and Dr. Richard Smith for the questions. Please visit the BC's and NELTA's websites. You will see the presenter's email ID. Now allow me to give a word of thanks to all. Thank you very much, Professor Ramassis Giri and Dr. Richard Smith, for your valuable and very useful presentation on participatory action research for professional development, planning, designing, and implementation. It was a great sharing on what is action research, how it could be useful to identify problems, and how to conduct action research through asking questions. Even during the lockdown, we can conduct with our students. It was a food for a thought for all of us. The methods and tools such as a student's consultation checklist, identifying problems, they were very informative and beneficial. I hope all the participants are very much enlightened and you are able to apply this in your classrooms. In spite of our busy schedule, we could do it. There are ways to do it. We have to explore situation and data collections and then come into action and to solve the problems. It was a great sharing about the success story of teachers. I hope it will help us to make our teaching learning very effective. On behalf of the organizer, I would like to express our sincere gratitude to both presenters and congratulate them for their effort and time providing for very practical sessions and responding all the queries. I also would like to thank all the national and international participants for your interactive participation and patience, and the team members from BC and NELTA working behind the curtain for your support for making all the webinar sessions a great success. We would like to announce the end of the webinar series of 3 months, May to July, and we will meet you soon on the second phase of webinar series soon. Until then, stay at home, be safe, and continue to learn. All the best. Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Richard. Thank you.